Hello and welcome to a quick video. What I'm going to do today is to fit an option pot to a Marshall 2204 amplifier, which I built at the end of last year. There is a capacitor on the preamp pot, and basically that gives it a bright sound, but what I'd like to do is be able to switch that on and off at will. Now, the front was specifically cut and marked for the existing pots. So basically what I want to do is add something that can be changed by the user quite easily, but is effectively hidden away. And that's what these option pots are good for. Basically this replaces the existing pot, but by pulling it or pushing it you can switch on these contacts, and therefore you can turn the option on and off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use these two contacts to take this bright cap in and out of circuit. First of all, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to double check which way round the switch is, just so I know. And I'll just stick the multimeter on continuity or resistance, and there's no connection there, and if I pull it out it goes to 0, which is what I expected. So pulling it out will connect these two pins together. So what I'm going to have is, for my brightness, I'm going to have it working on when you pull it. Okay, so I took the knob off using one of these, took the knob off with the screwdriver a moment ago, just so I could get the size of that, so I can also take this off. But before I go any further, I built this in a previous video, and this is the capacitor discharger. These two capacitors here I'm going to discharge. So hold the capacitor discharger to the two capacitors. Now they're discharged. If you want to see how to build the discharge wand, it's in video number 2. So first of all, I'm going to remove the existing pot. Using these plastic rockets avoids scratching the front face of the amplifier and causing damage. Now what I'm going to do now is to desolder the connections. Now obviously I built this amplifier, but if you are doing something like this to an amplifier that you've already bought, or that you're doing it for somebody else, a good way to make sure that you know what's going on is simply take a photograph of what's currently there. So I can do that now, making sure that I've got everything in focus. I'll post that on the video as well later on, just so that you can see what I've taken. Okay, so I'm now just going to desolder these connections. I'll just remove the shape-proof washer and fire up the soldering iron. Although I have Although I have a desoldering station, I find working on valve amplifiers that it's usually easier to use desoldering braid, but it is a personal choice, but it does have to be a decent one. I use this solder mop by Servizol. Now, sometimes when you're using things like soldering braid, it can make it simpler and easier to work if you resolder the connection, which is effectively just giving it a bit of flux. But because I only built this a couple of months ago, that shouldn't be an issue. So I'm not going to use any additional flux just at the moment. That and my solder fume extractor is switched off so that you can hear me, and I'd rather not breathe in the fumes as much as I can avoid. The wick makes quick work of these connections. Okay, this pot is only a month old. I'll use it in one of my own projects later on rather than it going to waste. So we'll now just double check that it physically fits. Before we wire it up, in case I just need to make anything bigger. The only thing that's a little bit out of place is if you look inside, there's a drill hole which locates with the tab on the old pot. So if I now place this in here, it's not quite matching up. It's literally 1/2 millimeter. So I'm just move that to one side. And that's much better. When I tighten that up, the lug will go in and then the body won't turn around with inside, which is really annoying. Okay, so we can now refer back to the photograph I took earlier. And basically, this connection goes there. The yellow one goes to the middle and the black one goes to this side. And I'm picking up the ground. This is a shielded cable, and I'm picking up the ground for the preamp cable, the shielding, from the body. Now just looking at it, I don't want to heat that up anymore, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave that for the moment. It's only connected at one end, so I'm going to leave that at the moment, and I'm going to actually jumper that to another ground. Okay, so the yellow goes to the center, and the resistor goes to the first pin. Now that's where I would have the capacitor. So what I'm going to need to do is somehow get that capacitor into this circuit. So it would be like that. So what I'm going to do now is to include the capacitor by attaching it to one of the lugs of the switch. So I'm going to physically attach the capacitor. And then once I've physically attached it, I'm going to connect the wires up. So that the connection is made through the switch. Okay, so I've connected one of the legs. I'm just going to, I'll need now some form of jump wire to connect the signal. Now it's a very short length of wire, so I'm not going to shield this because it's literally a few centimeters. Okay, so got a piece of wire. Just going to tin the two ends. Then cut them down to length. And this wire will go to one leg of the capacitor, which I'm just going to do now. Just going to straighten the leg. Now, I've attached a piece of wire to one leg of the capacitor. The capacitor is physically attached very closely to one lug of the switch, so it'll be fine. But this can sort of move around a little bit, and just sort of belt and braces, I'm going to heat shrink that connection just in case it doesn't do it any harm, but it can avoid issues later on. As it's a small black wire, as it's a small piece of heat shrink on the back of a switch and won't be seen. I'm just going to use a firelighter to heat the heat shrink rather than firing up the hot air workstation, and then that wire can then go through to the normal potentiometer tabs. So this will now go to there, and this one will go to the middle, and this will go to this side. So I now need to connect this tab to the center, and again I'll use another short jump of wire to do that. Just it's a bit long. Okay, so again I'll just tin these wires, sorry, this wire. Okay, and now this can go through as well. So one end will go through the tab as it did before, and the other will go to the switch, and I'll solder that. Okay, so as you can see, instead of the capacitor going across the two tabs, one leg of it goes to one tab and the other leg goes through the switch to the other. So when that's pulled out, as it is at the moment, it's just the same as having it between those two tabs. When I push the button, this is now disconnected, so it'll be taken out of circuit completely. Okay, so this will now go into place, not forgetting the shape-proof washer. I might not need that because I do have the tab. Looking at this, I am going to have an issue with the length of the shaft a little bit. Now there's two ways around that. One is to have the switch further in the hole, and the other is to take a bit off the end of the shaft. The problem with having it further in the hole makes the tab come out of this hole, so it would possibly rotate, and I'm not going to gain much space. Plus there aren't many threads left there, so even if I did have it there, which is the absolute maximum distance back, well, I might get away with it there. Right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try it. I deliberately didn't go through the whole thing beforehand, so that I can show you the sort of thought processes and so on. So what I've done now is I put the nut off the other pot onto there, then the shape-proof washer. That will go into place, and the nut will then go on from the front. and it just about makes it. If anything, it's actually a bit too short now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove that nut and try both the shape-proof washers instead. Okay, so that gives me a little bit more on the thread side of it, and that looks pretty good to me. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. The rotation will be stopped by the shape-proof washers, which is basically what they're for. The tabs are much better, but the shape-proof washer should be fine. So now I haven't tightened that up yet, which is why it's still moving. But that's the first connection made. And this is the second, the third. And then I've got the yellow wire, which goes through to here. So what I can do now is I can solder those up. There's an art to soldering while filming, which I will no doubt learn eventually. Now, just looking at this, obviously I need to connect the shield to ground. So what I need to do is I need to find a ground for it. Now I'm looking at this wire here and thinking about it. I think that, yeah, this goes to the negative side of the capacitor. I believe this is this wire does come from a decent ground connection. So if you're not sure, you can check. So that's into there and to ground. Third of a ohm, so yeah, that will be a ground. So this wire now can be connected, the shield can now be connected to this pin instead, which is what I'm going to do. Okay, so as you can see now, all the wires are connected to where they were before. We've got the resistor with the capacitor across it going to the first pin. We have the wire from the valve, the shielded wire, going to the second pin, and we have the ground going to the third pin. The shield is connected to the ground going to the third pin instead of the body, simply because I don't want to get any heating with the switch. The capacitor that did go between pin 1 and 2 now goes between pin 1 and 2, but using these jump wires, but they're separated by the switch. So now I just need to tighten up the nut, and again I'll use these handy rocket wrenches, and there we are. So just wind it down to 0, put it on in the right place, and tighten it back up, and there we have it, an option pot fitted to an amplifier. What I'll do is I'll just quickly do a test, and then I'll record that and post that at the end of the video. And this is the amp now put together. The amp as standard would have had the bright cap in place, and really I would have preferred to have had it so that with all the volume knobs in the correct positions, the bright cap was in the circuit, rather than pulling it to switch it on and on. I'd rather it be on in the other position. Unfortunately, the option pot only had a make or break switch, which negates that as a possibility without using relays and generally messing around. If you want to be able to switch things off that are in circuit, you could basically have an option pot that has a 3-pole switch on it, which is a 2-pole switch on it, so it can be either going to one or the other, and that would allow you to take it out of the circuit with it out rather than in. But that's a nice neat job, and it works fine. And this is the amp now put together. The amp as standard would have had the bright cap in place, and really I would have preferred to have had it so that with all the volume knobs in the correct positions, the bright cap was in the circuit, rather than pulling it to switch it on and on. I'd rather it be on in the other position. Unfortunately, the option pot only had a make or break switch, which negates that as a possibility without using relays and generally messing around. If you want to be able to switch things off that are in circuit, you could basically have an option pot that has a 3-pole switch on it, which is a 2-pole switch on it, so it can be either going to one or the other, and that would allow you to take it out of the circuit with it out rather than in. But that's a nice neat job, and it works fine.